Good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to the Strong Communities Select Committee. I do apologise that we have started a few minutes late. And if I can first of all ask for apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillors Roden, Guppy and Smith.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? We'll take them as and when. So I'm going to make a couple of changes to the agenda. We're going to have the public open forum, and so that the agenda runs smoothly, we'll then move item number 6, which is a verbal update from Roger Hoggins, to come straight after number 3, the public open forum. And then we'll take the confirmation of minutes of the last 2 meetings at the end of the meeting. I think first of all we'll have introductions, and I'd like to welcome 2 members of the public that have come to speak to us during our public open forum. So a warm welcome to Mr. Rogers and also to Mr. Cwnwr from Cwnwr. So if I could ask, I'm Jane Pratt. I'm obviously chair of this committee, and I represent Llanelli Hill, Clydach and Gilwan.
Paula Harris, Scrutiny.
Nicola Perry, Democratic Services.
County Councillor, Roger.
Roger Hoggins, Head of Operations.
County Councillor Roger Harris, Cresson Ward, Abergavenny, member of this committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Anne Webb. I represent St Albans and Tintern for Monmouthshire County Council.
County Councillor Sarah Jones, ward member for the Llanover ward and cabinet member for social justice.
I'm Councillor Tony Easton, Dewsbury Ward, Caldecott, a member of this committee.
I'm Tracy Harry. I'm Head of People Services and Information Governance. Good morning.
David Bartlett, Systems Support Lead, HR.
Sally Thomas, HR.
And I'm Hugh Candler, Clerk to Llanova Community Council.
Dave Loader, Central Finance.
Thank you all very much indeed. So we'll now move on to the first item, which is number 3, the public open forum. And I'll just explain that this gives members of the public the opportunity to address this committee with issues that are of concern to them. There won't actually be a response today. Obviously, we will listen to their presentations, and then, if appropriate, the officers will respond in due course. So first of all, I'd like to invite, I think I'll invite Mr. Cwnwr first, and then Mr. Rogers can present afterwards. So Mr. Cwnwr, thank you very much for coming along today. And if you'd like to come down, would you feel comfortable coming to the front to address the committee, or would you rather do it from there?
I'm very happy up here. Can you hear me?
Fine. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for hearing me. I'm the clerk, but I am going to read out statements which have been prepared by councillors, so that it doesn't come from me personally, but obviously I support it. There was an accident on the, in fact it's the R46, which is just by the Steel Horse Cafe, a fatal accident in July. And the first on the scene was Lady Boyle, who was the wife of the former Lord Lieutenant of the county. And she wrote a letter to the Chief Constable making certain complaints which have been made by many people who live on the B4598 and the R64 about the speed and noise, particularly of motorcycles, and particularly on warm, sunny afternoons on the weekend. And she got a reply. If I should say that the accident was not necessarily caused by speed, but it did highlight these other problems through this letter from Lady Boyle. And anyway, I had this public response from the Chief Constable, which said that first of all, the stretch of the B4598 between Raglan and the Steel Horse Cafe has in the last 2 or 3 years been made a 50 mph zone. And of course, we thank the council for doing that, and it has made a difference. Prior to this, it was 60 mph. So the local Monmouthshire County Council have already responded to historical concerns raised by the local community. Unfortunately, this is not supported with actual physical engineering works, which would have motivated drivers and riders to reduce their speed accordingly. It looks a bit like the speed passing the buck to Monmouthshire County Council. I'm not quite sure what they were expecting, and when they've had discussions with Monmouthshire County Council about what they felt could be done to encourage drivers and riders to reduce their speed. Anyway, it was explained to Monmouthshire County Council at the time that the imposition of the reduced 50 mph by our then Force Management Officer, which was Dave Matthews, that this was not necessarily with the endorsement of Gwent Police, as owing to the geography and layout along large lengths of the road, there will be very limited, if not no possibility, of police enforcement of this newly imposed limit. Mr. Matthews has since retired and the road has been discontinued. Then this thing refers to Operation Darwin, and this was set up intentionally with the view of addressing concerns on the B4598 during the spring and summer months. There was also no scope for speed analysis sessions to be performed by community support officers, as the maximum speed limit zone they are legally allowed to operate in is 40 mph. The nearest location which has been assessed as safe and appropriate to conduct such sessions is Llanfair Colgedin Village, being approximately 1.5 miles distance from the Steel Horse Cafe. Where possible, particularly during summer months, the USC NPT, that's the neighbourhood policing team, conduct high-visibility mobile patrols along the B4598 route, primarily in an effort to promote road safety, but also to address the issue of speeding by motorcyclists during fine weather. They then referred to the work of the camera safety unit, which of course only deals with speed and not with any other problems, such as noise, which is probably the biggest problem for people who actually live on the road. And anyway, they've taken data, but but the average speed was perfectly normal when they've done these things, because they take out the top 15 percentile of it. So they only really deal with the 85% of drivers, and of course, as is known, most cyclists and drivers drive perfectly sensibly. It's the 5% that that are the problem. Anyway, that's where we are there, and so this is a statement written by Graham Thomas, who's our current chairman and who lives in Landry Rutherwick and was responsible for setting up the Llanfair Colgedin Community Speed Watch. This was done in 2014. It was the first in Wales, and it checks speed on approximately 400 metres along a station at the top of the village. Observations show that it is only effective in slowing traffic and observing speed of for about 30 minutes, as oncoming motorists are provided advance notification by other motorists, which negates the effect of monitors. This, unfortunately, is a problem of any speed observation post. Unfortunately, due to illness, Police Sergeant Caroline gave up, and I think responsibility for Speed Watch, voluntary Speed Watch in Wales, moved to North Wales. The most annoying aspect of organising a Speed Watch team is providing details of the main speeding culprits via high-performance motorbikes due to difficulty in observation of the sometimes obscured rare number plates. Anyway, lack of support and general frustration really led to the Speed Watch team ceasing its operations, and so it hasn't operated for some time. But there are still ongoing problems. One can use 101 to report incidents, but there's not much confidence in that reporting system. And we don't hear much about Operation Darwin. And another area which could be addressed is the cooperation of VOSA, a joint operation that could be conducted on appropriate Sunday or Saturday, because it's VOSA who knows whether machines have been tampered with. And of course, what happens is that they use one exhaust system for their MOT tests and then put another one on that makes a lot of noise. And that's what is most upsetting. Now read out a statement from Ron Adam, who lives on the road and is aware of the problems and is very much involved. Over the last 2 years, driver behavior has marginally improved. There's still instances of speeding and a number of collisions, but recently this situation has changed dramatically due to the weather and due to word of mouth, as well as the sheer numbers that now use these roads for recreation activities. In the last 5 weeks, this was written last week, there have been a number of near misses and bumps, and sadly one fatality. He makes the following observations. One, the Llanova Community Council believes that there are now a large number of drivers who have illegal exhaust systems that create noise at whatever speed. Two, there are a small number of rogue drivers that drive along our roads when the weather is good between 4:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday mornings at extreme speeds. That is using the clear roads to do as fast as they can. But naturally, that is going to wake up people who will actually live on the road. There are a large number of recreation drivers who exceed 50 mph as a matter of course, especially when overtaking and when there are lines of traffic behind tractors. A number of residents of our community are afraid to use and do not use these roads at weekend.
Can I just mention, Mr. Candler, you have a couple of minutes left because we've
Right.
got another speaker. Thank you.
Proposals are, one, that the Gwent police should be encouraged to carry out irregular blitz operations to prosecute drivers not obeying the law, using Section 59A, which deals with inconsiderate driving. Two, more spaces to be found between Usk and Abergavenny for police and Go Safe Wales to carry on their duties safely. And I know County Councillor Brian Jones has offered to provide land on which a camera can safely, on which a camera vehicle can safely stand. Both Mums at County Council and Gwent Police should take notice of their websites that drivers behaving in antisocial matter, namely with illegal exhaust and driving aggressively, can be dealt with in this way. And finally, this is a special one from Mr. Ron Adam. He thinks that Monmouthshire County Council should promote on its digital material that the county is a quiet county that reflects its peaceful and rural, a beautiful rural nature. This initiative could be a marketing tool for our county and perhaps will be the first of its kind in Wales. And finally, it's been suggested that there be a task and finish group set up, combining the police, Monmouthshire County Council, and those community councils in the county who are affected by this, because Llanova is not the only one, to plan what to do, try and get VOSA involved, and improve the position for residents living on the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Candler, for coming along and addressing the committee. And obviously it is most regrettable that a life has been lost here, and we all have a duty to ensure that we do everything we can to prevent any future fatalities along this road. This is probably one of the most important issues facing our communities, and you may not be aware, but we do have a task and finish group, and I'll let Mr. Hoggins just give a little bit of information about that. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, there has been a member officer working group established to look at road safety and speeding in particular. It's include representatives from Gwent Police and also the Road Safety Partnership, which is Go Safe. That has put together a road safety strategy and is also put together a process and procedure for dealing with the numerous inquiries we get about road safety and speeding aspects. That is going to go to a member workshop in the beginning of October, and we will be inviting representatives from the community councils to attend that. And then, subject to that, we will then be going out for wider consultation, probably north and south, for other interested groups to look at this new policy and procedure and look at the strategy and again offer their comments. So it has been a matter which members have raised on numerous occasions. We know it's an important and emotive matter for residents of Monmouthshire. So that is how the group is now taking this forward. In relation to the, specifically in relation to Mr. Candler's point, Madam Chairman, would you like me to respond to that? Okay. In relation to the specific points raised by the Nova Community Council, if indeed I can have those documents, I wasn't aware of the letter from the Chief Constable to Lady Boyle. If I can see that, and perhaps Hugh can provide me with a couple of other notes, then on behalf of our Cabinet member, I would draft a letter to the Chief Constable to see what action can be taken jointly between Gwent Police, Monmouthshire County Council and the Traffic Safety, Road Safety Partnership to put in place added measures to manage the speed on that road. I would have to say the idea of introducing engineering works, which in the local parlance might be chicanes and humps and bumps and the like on a 50-mile-an-hour road, is somewhat unusual. I have heard it referred to on 20-mile-an-hour roads, never on a 50. Nevertheless, we will work with those other bodies to try and see what we can do to improve that.
Thank you very much, Roger. Would either Councillor Jones, the two Councillor Joneses, like to make any comments at all, as we're fortunate to have them with us today? First of all, yeah.
Just to say, I did make public my thoughts about providing facilities for the speed cameras to operate probably well over 12 months ago. So all we need really, because it's not a hugely expensive job, all we need really is direction from the police or the Safety Camera Partnership about where they would wish to have one of these sites. And I'm sure, despite our financial difficulties as a council, we can find enough money, I'm sure, to provide a site for a safety camera vehicle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. And would the other Councillor Jones like to comment as well, as it's her ward?
Only very briefly, Madam Chairman, just to support everything that Mr. Candler said, and just to thank Roger and the Cabinet member for their commitment to write a letter echoing what can be done, the action that can be taken, the support that we can give, which can then go back both to the Police and Crime Commissioner, who we met with, or the Community Council met with last week, and also to the police, to the letter that Hugh's received. And just one other point, just to say, this has been a really good example of how a scrutiny committee can actually take forward some of these issues, because it's thanks to this committee that this whole process started, and we got the speed limit on the road a few years ago. So again, that democratic process going through the scrutiny committee is really valuable. So we thank the committee for that opportunity and for allowing us to bring the issue forward today.
Thank you very much. Did you want to make any further comment, Mr. Candler, or you?
No, that's very encouraging, what I've heard. Thank you.
Thank you. And we very much look forward to seeing representatives from your community at our workshop in October.
Certainly. Thank you.
Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Well, this matter is not unusual to that particular area of Monmouthshire. It's a problem we've had constantly across the piece. And the Cemetery Area Committee has been dealing with this sort of matter locally through the Area Committee, which is I think the right way to take things, and we've managed to escalate them to this level. We in that Cemetery Area Committee have had the Police and Crime Commissioner there. We have had the commandant, or what you want to call him, for the area, and various police officers and Go Safe to try and deal with the matters in the south of the county. So it's not just restricted to that particular part of Monmouthshire, which I know quite well. So I would advise that yes, they come to this workshop in October, which hopefully we can try and tranche out a way forward to try and get on top of these matters, because they're across the county, full stop. Slightly different in the south, because we got the B4245, which we carry a hell of a lot of heavy goods vehicles, and we're trying to find ways of reducing that. But speed is also a concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. So you're very welcome to stay if you'd like to, Mr. Candler, and it's entirely up to you. So if I can now ask Mr. Rogers to address the committee, and Mr. Rogers has a presentation which he's going to show us. Thank you very much.
Speaker on. Red button. Right.
How's that? Okay. So thank you for inviting me. I was here at the last Select Committee meeting to discuss more than the issues I wish to discuss today, but I'll run through this presentation which focuses on one element of our concerns as a small neighbourhood group at Llangerview in central Monmouthshire. So the issues relate to heavy goods vehicles, a narrow Monmouthshire lane, a very narrow Monmouthshire lane, an ancient hedgerow, and the Section 6 duty. So it focuses on the activities at Coed Cwnwr farm, which over the last 10 years has moved more towards cattle from sheep, but it's still mixed, and there's been a lot of land acquisition as well. This has led to lorries like this, bringing in aggregates, fertilizers, different styles of lorries bringing in feed, and then farm machinery to attend to the needs of the farm on a contract basis. Just to say that these aren't necessarily the vehicles concerned, but they are representative of the types of vehicles that are attending this farm on a very regular basis. And of course, more livestock means more feed and more livestock movements, and greater inputs into the farm, fertilizers and aggregates particularly, are leading to greater lorry movements as well. And you can see how constrained the lane is where these lorries are coming. And this is the entrance to the farm taken at the back end of last winter. So it's causing significant damage. This is a tarmac surface as well. It changes to a dirt track just beyond the farm entrance on the right. So looking at lorry movements in detail, in September 2014, we observed 15 individual deliveries made to Coed Cwnwr farm by HGVs. And then in 2017, we recorded 29 HGVs and livestock lorries. And do bear in mind, these are underrepresentative because we're not at home all the time and we can only count the lorries that we see. Then in 2018, 22 HGVs and livestock lorries, and surprisingly, of which 20 were in July and August alone. So that's only just happened. And this was delivery of aggregates and fertilizer again. So we started lobbying the council quite actively in 2014, and kindly you installed an advisory sign, but it's made absolutely no difference whatsoever, unfortunately. And then Roger Hoggins agreed to speak to Mr. Lewis, the farmer, and was told, I don't have this verbatim, but large vehicle bulk lorries are no longer going to be coming to the farm for the foreseeable future. Surprisingly then, between March 2017 and August 2018, 36 vehicles have been recorded attending his farm. So there's something disingenuous there at the very least. So we need to look at the lane itself. Why is it a problem? Why are these vehicles causing a problem? The lane is very, very narrow. It's flanked on both sides by gardens, verges, hedge banks and hedgerows, and the hedge banks in many instances are vertical. The lane serves 6 houses, the farm itself and 2 rented properties on the farm. But the width of the let's call it a lane because it is a lane, is between 2.4 and 2.5 metres wide. A typical 40-ton truck is 2.55 metres wide, so we already know that the wheels of these vehicles are gouging out the verges and the sides of the vehicles are bashing into the hedgerows and into garden hedgerows as well as hedgerows of conservation concern. So there is a length of ancient hedgerow which runs for about 200 metres at the start of the lane, and NRW has assessed the hedgerow as being important. They also advise that it's a priority habitat. Now, this is where we get into legislation. Any habitat that's on the Section 7 list of the Environment Act is worthy of serious consideration. And the Act goes on to say, ancient hedgerows are of principal importance for the purpose of maintaining and enhancing biodiversity in relation to Wales. And then guidance says that public authorities in complying with the Environment Act must have regard to the Section 7 list. So in this instance, the local authority or the public authority must have regard to the ancient hedgerow because it's on that list. This is a diagram to show what's happening on the lane. There's a gentle curve in the lane. This is obviously exaggerated. The white blocks represent a vehicle moving up the lane, and as the vehicle rounds the gentle bend, the rear wheels are pulled across to the right because they don't follow the front wheels, and they're just simply gouging out the earth bank and bashing into the ancient hedgerow. So here's some examples of what's going on. You can see here that the lower part of the hedge bank is being undercut by the wheels. This is roughly wheel height of the lorries. And those primroses 10 years ago were down to the ground, and of course the bank was vegetated fully. This is more an indication of what's going on. You can see here where there's been a small slump just recently inside the red circle, and that's happening along the length of this hedge bank. It's being degraded and eroded every passing week. And here's a tree that's been laid, or a hedgerow plant that's been laid, and it's had its front surface scalloped completely off by the passing vehicles. So that plant will, in no doubt, in the future die. And then again, you can see here the hedge bank is being undercut to the point where it's actually further back from the road than the face of the hedgerow. These are the kind of vehicles that are causing the problem. This lorry is just entering the stretch of ancient hedgerow. But the reason for the red circle is this is one of my neighbour's gardens, Mrs. Margaret Cook at Bank House. You can see the impact on the verge there. This is an aerial photograph taken in 2012, which shows that the length of verge is much the same thickness all the way along the fence line. But now the lorries are causing this. The earth is being pushed up as the lorries pass through. And that bottom rail of the fence was 6 inches clear of the ground 10 years ago. Or 8 years ago, and it's starting to rot because it's constantly damp now. So it's causing her problems, in no less fact than she's losing part of her garden. And this shows a view back down the lane again, and you can see her garden is divided by the road, and the right-hand verge is being damaged as well. This is hay that's brushed through the hedges, and we've had branches broken out of hedges, and trees have had limbs torn off them, and so on. So we issued a formal complaint because we felt we weren't getting anywhere by bringing this information to Highways. The formal complaint was obviously assessed by the council, and it was found that no action needed to be taken. But in our view, as a community group, the investigation didn't take into account the Section 6 duty of the Environment Act. So the Section 6 duty, it's new legislation 2016, imposed by Welsh Government in response to the significant decline in biodiversity across Wales. Its purpose is to reverse, not to arrest, but to reverse the decline in Welsh biodiversity. And key to compliance is the embedding of biodiversity into decision-making at all levels, at all public bodies. At the corporate level, early planning should seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity, preventing its loss in the first instance. So it starts at the top and drills its way down through the organisation. So we looked at the guidance and found that the public bodies must seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity so far as consistent with the proper exercise of their functions, and in so doing, promote the resilience of ecosystems. They should embed the consideration of biodiversity and ecosystems into their early thinking and business planning, including policies, plans, programs and projects, as well as the day-to-day activities. It's completely all-encompassing. They must prepare and publish a plan setting out what they propose to do to maintain and enhance biodiversity and promote resilience. And they must ensure this plan is integral to the public authority's business or corporate planning processes. That's quite complex language, I think. And so what we did as a community group was get in touch with Welsh Government's Natural Resource Policy Department and ask them for clarity on this particular issue relating to the ancient hedgerow. They advised us that the Section 6 duty applies when public bodies are carrying out their functions. In this case, the highways function must seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity. The guidance states that each function of a public authority should consider where they can contribute to Welsh Government's Nature Recovery Action Plan objectives and to promoting resilience. And it is intended that the Council takes a proactive approach to seeking to maintain and enhance biodiversity. They continued, Monmouthshire County Council has prepared its Section 6 plan in which it states it will be working with each service area on their own plans. This provides an opportunity, and this is Welsh Government's view, not mine, this provides an opportunity for the highways function to look for positive actions they can take to maintain and enhance biodiversity. And we've got a hedge, an ancient hedgerow, that's a priority, or Section 7 priority habitat being bashed to pieces by lorries. So the frequent use of oversized lorries on a very narrow lane is the cause of the problem. You can see here a hay bale falling off into one of my neighbour's hedges. The lorries are wider than the lane. That's an absolute fact. They're causing damage to an ancient agricultural hedgerow. They're causing damage to garden verges, hedgerows and properties. The regular appearance of these lorries is blighting residents' quality of life. And there's been a failure, in our view, of MCC's highways to effectively apply the Section 6 duty. So in conclusion then, we feel that the Highways Department has failed to produce a plan intended to conserve and enhance biodiversity as required by the legislation, does not take the Section 6 duty into account regarding its day-to-day activities, and has failed to take the Section 6 duty and our evidence, which is quite comprehensive, into account when reaching a decision on our formal complaint. The legal requirements of the Section 6 duty are neither well understood nor embedded at MCC highways. This again is our view as a community group. And from the information we've submitted, it's clear to us that the legislation has not been effectively applied and an important habitat has and continues to be affected. We would ask this committee to investigate these shortcomings, if you feel they are shortcomings, and ensure that they're resolved at the earliest opportunity. And we think something as simple as this kind of signage, enforceable signage, could make all the difference. So I just have one more thing to show you, which takes a few seconds. Bear with me. I don't know how well you can see that, but it speaks for itself. You can see how the wheels are gouging into the hedge bank on the right-hand side. That's the ancient hedgerow. And you can see that the damage is roughly level with the flatbed of the lorry. I don't know if you can see the straw coming off the bales as they're rubbing against the hedgerow. It's only a few seconds longer. And then it's now approaching Mrs. Cook's house. This is where the damage has occurred to her verge and fence line. But it's so narrow here, the lorry has to practically stop to squeeze through, and she's had lots of damage to the end of her house over the years because of these kind of vehicle movements. So that's it. That's what I wanted to bring to your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Rogers, and you've obviously put a great deal of time and effort into that presentation.
You're not kidding, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Obviously, we have a very fine balance. We are a rural economy, and we rely heavily for the prosperity of our county on the farming, the contribution of farming that it makes to our economy. So it is a very fine balance where we've got ancient lanes, really, that have been there for hundreds of years and modern machinery. Can I ask Mr. Hoggins just to come back, and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am aware, I've met Mr. Rogers previously about this matter, and I know Mr. Rogers has had correspondence with other officers. I believe members would benefit from a further report back to yourselves to respond to the particular issues raised within Mr. Rogers' presentation. I'd be grateful if Mr. Rogers would let us have the presentation to work with.
Not a problem.
So I would suggest, Madam Chairman, to offer you a full response that we provide a written report to your next meeting.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hoggins, and thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, and you're very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish to.
Thank you.
So we now move on to our next item, and I'd just like to thank both members of the public for coming along today and for their contributions, which are obviously greatly valued by all of us. So we're going to now have a verbal report on this same subject, which is a discussion item to consider the implications of restricting HGVs with a view to developing a future policy. So, Mr. Hoggins, could you?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I know it's unusual for members to receive a verbal report at this stage, but I felt it was useful, given that We have had, well aware that Mr Rogers was going to make this presentation, and we previously discussed HGV issues in other parts of the county. I previously spoke about developing a heavy goods vehicle strategy. I've also discussed it with officers. Where are we with this? What can we do? And to look at a strategy, it's going to be a broad subject. It's more than simply looking at, in this case, Mr. Rogers' presentations, but large vehicles in small lanes. But we would also need to look in a strategy to look at how a preferred route or alternative route strategy would work. Times of access, which we use for heavy goods and large vehicles in some of our towns to improve retail options. Advisory signs versus statutory notices. Previous HGV strategies which we're aware of have dealt with providing preferred routes for HGVs, particularly in relation to travelling to industrial estates. It's possible now that that's our intention of providing preferred routes may well be overtaken by sat-navs, because they're more likely to refer to a sat-nav than they are to a Monmouthshire, due respect to Monmouthshire County Council, to a Monmouthshire County Council heavy goods strategy. So whatever we do has to embrace those aspects as well. Any strategy would quite necessarily also have to address the authority's responsibility in relation to Future Generations and Wellbeing Act and the Environment Act, as raised by Mr Rogers in his presentation, but our general responsibilities in relation to that. Those must be balanced against our responsibility as a highway authority and our roles within that as well. At the moment, we deal with heavy goods, I'll just call it generally heavy goods matters, on a case-by-case basis. There is the Alltybella case, which we've heard of. There's been a case in Capra, and there's also the B4245 case, and we've dealt with those on a case-by-case basis. And the B4245, we've actually commissioned a survey and a report from our consultants, which hopefully will have available in the not too distant future, about what the options are and what the issues are surrounding that. And whilst we could continue to work on a case-by-case basis, an overarching strategy and policy and procedure would be preferable for us. Our issue at the moment is we have no resources available to develop that. Nevertheless, if members wish to see that, then that's something we can programme for future contributions, future commitment. I offer this verbal report by way of giving you some background to where we are in relation to dealing with this matter. I think, taken in the broader context, there is no doubt that the vehicles using our county roads are larger than they were 20 or 30 years ago, be they agricultural or industrial. Nevertheless, you have a balance. I would suggest you have a balance to strike between maintaining your businesses within the county and your responsibilities around biodiversity, ecology, and your highways responsibility. So there's no doubt that in the future a strategy and policy and procedure, as long as members are wedded to that, will benefit the authority overall. But just at the moment, I think we are dealing with it on a case-by-case basis. So it would be for members to consider whether or not they wish the officers to develop a strategy in the future, and for us to then find resources to do that. But at the moment, I have to advise members that we do not have staff resources available to do it at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr Hoggins, for that update. And we will now obviously ask councillors to respond to to the verbal update. If I could bring in Councillor Webb, first of all.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rogers, for coming this morning, and I'd just like to thank Roger for coming as well. And I really would welcome this strategy when time permits and when you're able to do this with other officers concerned. And thank you very much.
Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you again once again, Madam Chairman. Yes, I support the initiative that Roger is now trying to move forward. As I said earlier, the problems that I see in the south of the county are not dissimilar to the problems you got in Langview, isn't it, that area. It's not the same sort of narrow country lane, but what we're experiencing are massive 40-ton lorries going up what are our roads, which are the basic lanes, in other words, and they're doing the same thing to the sides of those roads, particularly on the Dewstor Road, which runs into Councillor Murphy's ward, where they're trying to redevelop a quarry. And of course, they got these massive lorries going up there, upsetting the public who can't walk properly on the roads. So it's an issue that we got to try and grasp a nettle of and try and sort out. The lorries are getting bigger, and yesterday, for example, there's a development going on in my ward where 2 40-ton lorries, one was escorted up the correct way to get there, which is quite tortuous, and the other one chose to take his own way. And if anybody knows Burbeck Road in Caldecott, how the guy got up there, God only knows. But the drivers are good, but the vehicles are too big for the road. So yes, I support the way we're going, and as Lisa will most probably support, is that we've got this particular problem on the B4245. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dimmock.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Roger, and I welcome the strategy too. Just with regards to B4245, did the letters go out to the local hauliers that are using that route? Because I know away from this committee in the Severn side, it did go out. Did we have any response back from hauliers?
I can't confirm one way or the other, Councillor Dimmock, whether or not the letters went out, but I can ask. I have checked this morning. Sorry, they were drafted. As far as I know, they went out, but I'll have to confirm that for you. I can tell you, I checked this morning in the Capita report. It's not completed, but it's getting close to. As soon as we've got it, we'll make that available to you.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Rogers showed a couple of signs that maybe we could implement, like weight restrictions and width restrictions. How enforceable are they in law? That's the important thing. If a lorry chooses to ignore them because it has to get to a particular place, and for example gets stuck, what sort of penalties are there?
Mr. Hoggins, do you want to come
back? They are
back?
enforceable. If they are traffic orders put in place, then they are enforceable. They're not advisory; they are enforceable. I have to come back to you on what type of sanctions would be taken on it. And they're enforceable by the police. But they are, yes, they are traffic orders to be enforced. Some double yellow is not a good example, but where you put limits elsewhere, if somebody has done that, you do, however, have to have reasons for putting them there. And weight limits in particular would require some sort of physical feature which would be at risk if indeed you put weight limits on it. So there's a lot goes behind those being put in place, and they are subject to consultation in any event. But yeah, they are enforceable.
Any other questions from members? Did Councillor, the portfolio holder, want to make any comments at all? Councillor Jones, did you want to make any comment? No? Well, thank you very much for the update, Roger. And obviously, if Mr. Rogers could make his presentation available, and we will, Roger will respond to that. I think you also did highlight the massive issue, no matter what we do. And I know in my ward of Llanelli Hill, we regularly have drivers, very often from other countries, with sat-navs that are not suitable for their vehicles, going up my very narrow lanes to try and get to Llanelli near Swansea, which poses its own difficulties. We even had one who got stuck on the bridge and had to be lifted off. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for your contributions, and we look forward to the response next time. So we now move on. Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. We now move on to our next item, which is the People Services Information Update. And if you can remember, earlier on in the year, we did have a presentation which we asked if we could have a further update, because this committee was extremely concerned about, especially about the amount of money being spent on the absence within the council, sickness and other issues. So we're very pleased to have this update today. And if I could just ask, for the benefit of those watching online, the members of that department that have come along, if you could just introduce yourselves once more, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Tracy Harry. I'm Head of People Services and Information Governance.
Good morning. I'm Sally Thomas from HR.
Hello, I'm David Bartlett and I'm System and Data Lead in the Support Services team.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to give your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, thank you for your introduction. A number of issues have been raised with regard to sickness, HR data, and some other issues were raised as part of the discussion around the People Services Strategy, which came to the last committee on the 14th of June. What I've done today is to try and address those issues that Peter captured for me at that meeting. I think the particular concern is around attendance, and as the Chairman has already alluded to, our high sickness levels, and what are we doing in terms of trying to get on top of that. And there were issues raised around, do we have the data to enable us to actually target areas across the authority where we have specific problems. So what I've done in the paper, I've addressed all of the issues, but in terms of the key issue around attendance, sickness, what I've done is I've asked my colleague David to demonstrate our dashboard, which is basically, it's information that is provided to managers to help them identify key areas of concern around sickness in their particular service area. Clearly, as part of our HR business partnering arrangements, we support our managers in terms of endeavouring to deal with high sickness levels, and we have a range of interventions to do that. But first and foremost, I thought it would be beneficial for the committee to actually see the data that is actually available to managers to help them identify issues in their particular area. So if I can just hand over to David now, what he will do is very briefly run through the data that is available to managers on a regular basis.
Right, fingers crossed with the current IT situation that we've had today, things will work. Right, so basically, all sickness absence data is fed through to the payroll system through MyView. What we then do is to put reports out of Resource Link, which is the system, and then form it into a dashboard so that people can readily see all the various information that's available to them.
I can't read it. I don't know if Roger can read it.
No,
It's very bright.
We don't have this in our pack, do we, this information? No. No.
This is an interactive site.
Yeah.
What you do have is an analysis as your appendix. You don't have this, but this is what managers have.
Okay, I think this is a particular problem that occurs on a regular basis in this chamber, actually. And I can remember attending a training course many years ago on giving presentations where they said, make sure your slides can be read by somebody at the back of the room. And I know it's representative of what's online, and I think we'll just have to take it as, if we want further information, we can actually, if you can show us where the link is, and we can follow that up after the meeting. Thank you.
So it's an interactive spreadsheet in essence that allows managers, yourselves, anyone else that wants to look at it to see what their data is. So it's based on reports that's coming out of Resource Link that's been entered in by managers for their sickness absence. And it comes in two sort of areas. The first set of area is what's known as slices, and that's these little green blocks. So it's covering the directorate, the department, the unit. You can look at sickness by age profile, whether it's long-term, short-term, or by gender, or by absence reason as well. So in essence, what it's doing is to look at everything within the report and then produces graphs based on that. So at the moment, it's looking at the sickness absence reason for the whole council, and it shows it in a pie chart. This is also shown then with a split of long-term and short-term absence. And at the bottom, we have the figures that match. Because it's interactive, it allows you then to do a lot more than just looking at graphs, which was the old way we used to do things. So if you wanted to specifically to say, look at young children and young people, you highlight it, all the graphical data changes, all the figures change. So straight away you can see if there's issues in children and young people, what are the main areas of sickness absence, and it would appear that it's serious illness in this instance. You can then drill down to the next level, or to the unit level. So if I look at finance section within children and young people, again, the graphs change, the data changes. So you can really hone in on specific areas.
Can I just ask you one thing, Dave? Sorry to interrupt you, but it says on page 16 that unfortunately members do not have access to the People Services section of the Hub. Is this on the People Services section of the Hub? Yes. So we wouldn't actually have access to it? Not at this point. Which is a shame, really, isn't it? Because we can't actually see where the issues are. Could you...
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, no, at the moment, because that was an issue that was raised at the last meeting, that members weren't able to access the People Service Hub and couldn't see the information that's on it. So in terms of prepping for today's meeting, I asked the question, why not? And apparently members don't have access to the Hub at the moment. But that's something that I will take up with our digital team to see whether or not that can be arranged.
Yes, because obviously we can't check it afterwards if we can't get onto the site. Thank you, Councillor Easton.
The only question I would ask is really, if we did have access to it, would we have the tools to interpret it? You know, that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, what we could do is have a briefing session for members. I mean, you know, I don't think it's beyond the wit of any of us to interpret pie charts and graphs. Councillor Harris.
Just following on from that, it would be useful for us to have a single page with your interpretation of why things are getting worse or better, or what the reasons are. For example, you know, with adults, we don't seem to be altering the very high level of sickness absence there over the years, and I just wonder, you know, what your thoughts are on that. Is it something to do with the survey, or staff aren't engaged or disinterested, or overworked?
Thank you, Councillor Harris.
Must be.
What we've done, Councillor Harris, is in the appendix we've actually given you a detailed analysis of the sickness for the whole authority for the period 2017-18. And basically it looks at the previous year, it looks at the current year, it looks at each area, so social care and housing, enterprise, operations, and identifies what are the issues, whether or not the sickness has gone up, has gone down. So it's given you a detailed analysis of the sickness in each of the areas, the interventions that are happening, some of the reasons that we consider the sickness may have increased or gone down or whatever. So what we've done is we've done a comprehensive analysis, which is what we do anyway as HR. And what my suggestion is, which is in the recommendation in the report, is that we do that analysis and bring it back to this committee on an annual basis so that you can see the whole picture for the whole authority. Obviously, the picture is cumulative. So as we go through the year, the picture changes. And also in terms of our recording of sickness, that because it's our reporting is a position in time, and that can keep changing. So as people put the information onto our system, then the data gets updated. So what I'm suggesting is that we actually bring you back an annual report as detailed as the one that you've got in your appendix today, which will give you all of that information and intelligence as to what's happening with sickness, why we think it's happening, and what interventions we're putting in place to try and address it.
Would that, there's an awful lot of detail there. Would that fit on 1 page or 2 pages of A4?
I think
to
it's
stand alone, sort of thing. So we've got it, and it's not buried, if you like, in 150 pages.
We can summarise it for you and make it onto a side of two
If-
sides of A4.
If every report could be like that, it'd be fantastic, because we know where to drill down then if we want to.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Sorry, if you'd like to carry on with your presentation, Dave.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So it's quite intuitive. You basically you click a box and you get the results at the end of it. So mentioned adult services. Now this is based on the hierarchy held within Resource Link. So adult services as a whole would come into this sort of area. But then you could drill down to see where in adult services, for example. So if I to click that, we do adult services. So it could be that perhaps there's an issue in community care in Abergavenny. So you could straight away click on that and see what the issues or the sickness absence reasons are for community care in Abergavenny. And one of the biggest things there would be breaks and fractures. Now, in community care in Chepstow, it's mental ill health. So even though you've got, say, adult services, within each of the little pockets within adult services, you can hone in and see what exactly is the issues in that little area. I'm saying little in inverted commas as well, because obviously social services in particular would have musculoskeletal areas, mental ill health areas for sickness absence. So that relates to the slices at the top, which allows you to hone in on individual areas. There's straightforward bar charts and graphs to show the current directorate structure. The blue or the black, it's hard to see for myself actually, it's right in front of me, shows the current levels. The reds show the predicted levels if they carry on the trend throughout the year. So it's shown at the moment the current target, which is the black line, is 10.5 FTE days per year. Overall, it's looking to be 10.7. So you could say it's there or thereabouts, with a caveat, you're coming into the winter terms, and things do tend to change then. And it shows straight away that operations is a particular area. Children and young people looks to be going higher, and social care and health look to be higher. You always got to take figures with a slight bit of caution, because if you look at figures as they are without any interpretation, as Tracy said, it looks as if in this instance children and young people are going to go over. Now, children and young people is not schools, so it's quite a small area now, so that could relate to one person being off long term. So please, you do need that. You always need that depth of knowledge rather than take figures at face values. Underneath this is a little thermometer, and it basically tells you, when you do get an opportunity to see it, obviously, you can then drill down into a little bit more detail, and it gives a high sort of level position on various issues. So it shows for this particular thing, the council, again, the target is 10.5, where we currently are, where it's forecasted to be. And again, if we scroll down, and this is quite small to see from your angles, so I pick Budden Crescent, for example. Shows the target stays, shows what their current average or current sickness is, and where it's forecast to be. So straight away, the little red mark at the top of the thermometer is an indicator there could be issues potentially there. And again, if we look at Coed School, at the moment, there's no potential issues based on the current forecast and what it's doing. And again, you've got the little, it's called a spark line, a little chart to show how it's going as since the 1st of April. So that's the one thing that we're doing to give managers and everyone else access to understand sickness absence data. There's also another one on the similar lines, and this covers, excuse me, this is not my computer, so I'm struggling with it. This covers generic data for HR. Oops, sorry, it's not mine. So this is, again, based on a drop-down list, based on information coming from our HR system, and it covers more generic data. So we have the numbers of part-time, full-time, male, female, FTE to head count, the gender split, post-occupancy, oops, sorry. We have starters and leavers, the reasons for leaving, and the age profile for the council. So straight away, you can start to look at this and you think, well, there's a lot of staff. There's a lot of staff over 45. If you think of it, it's practically 54% are over or fall into the category of 45 and over. So straight away, where's your workforce planning coming into it?
So so all of this data is working with managers to say, right, how are you planning for the future? So if you take, I can give an example. They're predominantly using heavy equipment, the lifting, etc. Within the next 10 years, over 50% of them are going to be over 55 years of age, which means that there is a potential that they're likely to have more sickness and will be unable to continue to do the types of jobs that they're continuing to do. So from a workforce planning perspective, that's great data to enable managers to plan ahead to say, well, okay, how can we either redeploy these individuals into other less manual tasks, and how do we make sure we've got youngsters coming through in terms of taking on those roles? So one of the things that we'll be considering next week at SLT is a cadetship programme for highways and waste, etc., to actually bring young people in, to actually train them and grow our own in terms of succession planning as part of workforce planning for that part of the service. So all of this data is absolutely rich in enabling us to see the picture of what's going on in particular service areas.
Councillor Harris.
One of the interesting slides up there, you were showing thermometers, and you showed a thermometer of Coed School. It's not surprising, it's absolutely brand new and people love it, so they want to be there. And that's a big clue, isn't it?
It could...
Can we have a look at Chepstow School?
For you on the thermometer version.
Yeah, please.
And again,
fabulous tool. That really is.
and again, if you want to look at in a little bit more detail, you would go up here. So you go to schools, Chepstow School straight away. So you could see
What's the biggest reason for absence?
50% mental ill health. And when you look at just for that school, 59% of people when they're off will go long term. And you can even then, if you wanted to say, well, in the specific age groups, so say 25 to 34, that mental ill health goes to 70%. If you look at the 45 to 54 age group, still 66%. So I'm 35 to 44, it drops. It's not so big, still the biggest, but it shows that perhaps in that particular age group there's a bit more resilience. Or you could look at it and say, well, who are the teachers in that particular age group? Is it certain subjects that causes issues? Certain classes cause issues? But it gives you that information that you can look at one school in or any particular unit and drill down. I think what this does is previously when we used to do sickness absence monitoring, you would have straightforward bar charts that were historic. It happened, this is what it was. This allows you now to look at it in a bit more detail at far greater depth, but also gives you the opportunity to...
Can I just bring in
forecast
Councillor
just a
Easton?
little
Sorry.
bit.
Yeah, Councillor Easton.
Just one point on those pie charts. You've got a fair blob of red on one. Do they relate to any particular year groups or stress? For example, a teacher taking on A-level stuff as opposed to a new teacher taking on the youngsters. Do they split up in any way, shape, or form?
Not in relation to this. This is just the age of the person that's on the sick. You could find out who that, or from the school point of view, through the business partner meetings, you could then look in and hone in a bit further to see who those individuals are, but there's no individual data held that you can visibly see.
So at that point, you can then deal with individual problems.
It might be useful just to add at this point, because I think it aligns well with what's just been talked about. The HR business partner meetings with head teachers for those schools that are signed up to our Monmouthshire SLA, that's where we would drill down into that detail, Councillor Eason. So the business partner meeting would go through any long-term absence and see what action the head teacher and the governing body were considering, interventions and support, etc. So that's where the HR business partner meetings then has that information to be able to discuss with the manager or the head teacher.
But would you relate that to the teaching programme and possibly put the teaching programme right? If there's a fault in it, if there's a problem with the teaching programme? That's
for the head teacher to do that, yeah. Not through us, no. I mean, there's only 6 of us, so we wouldn't look at the teaching programme. You know, the head teacher and the manager has responsibility for the absence and the attendance issues within their school or their area. So, you know, whatever those reasons are, we can help to support, but we wouldn't actually, you know, do the doing. If it was a teacher programme, whatever that was, that's for the head teacher then to take on board and to put some interventions in place.
See, my main concern was resolution of the problem. Do you get to the bottom of it? Do you resolve it? And then does this change in the future? And are you able to monitor this sort of strategy on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's what we do. This is the dashboard that helps us to do that. And we look at the absence figures and we do year-on-year comparisons. And then coupled with our HR business partner meetings, that enables that flow and that review and that monitoring to take place. It's interesting, actually, schools have got, you know, good levels of attendance. They're well below the council, overall council figure. For last year was 10.8 days per employee. For schools, that figure is 8.64 for 17-18. So schools schools are quite good overall.
Just to add to that, Councillor Hewson, I mean, if there's a particular individual that's on long-term sick, that's got specific issues, we would be discussing with the HR officers, would be talking with the head teacher and saying, right, what are you doing to try and get this person back into the workplace? We would support that. We wouldn't just leave that then. We would have ongoing discussions with the head teacher in terms of getting the individual back into the workplace. We would offer counselling and support and any sort of facilitation that we can to try and support them to get the individual back into the workplace. So it's not just a conversation and that's it. It's an ongoing dialogue.
But on the overall operation, say, of Chepstow School, I understand that you don't have HR responsibility in Chepstow School. Or are you back with responsibility? How do you as an HR department interact with the HR company that runs Chepstow School in terms of your responsibility to the teachers who are your employees?
Okay. Well, each school obviously commissions the HR advisory service that they wish to pay for. And in most cases, in Monmouthshire, they buy into the Monmouthshire HR SLA. But Chepstow School and Monmouth Comprehensive are the only two schools now that don't buy into Monmouthshire. So the responsibilities, the responsibilities in terms of that, we wouldn't liaise with the HR advisory service for those schools, but CYP, DMT and the chief officer and his DMT will be doing that to make sure that they fulfil their statutory responsibilities in relation to all elements of people management at those schools.
Have you completed your presentation or have you got more to show?
There's just a little bit more, just a couple more graphs. So back to the HR, the People Services dashboard, there's also another chart for length of service, so you can see how long people have actually worked for us or been in local government. It does show a little bit about the sickness absence data again, but this is based on a higher level than the previous sickness absence data dashboard, if that makes sense. It's based on a smaller drop-down list. So if we look at people services, everything changed. So we now know how many part-time, full-time, male, females, gender split, the occupancy again. But then you can also look to see, using the slicers again, to see where people are in this, and this is linked back to the council. So if you wanted to see length of service, how many people have, or the numbers of people that have over 30 years service, straight away you can find out, and you think it's in operations. There's a lot of I'm saying that's the wrong word, isn't it, elderly? There's a lot of people with a lot of service in operations. So you're back to looking at your workforce monitoring and thinking, is that going to be an issue in 2, 3, 4 years' time? Needs to be addressed. Yeah.
It's an issue now.
But at least having this visual information, it's in your face. You can see it straight away. It's obvious. Rather than trawling through massive reports of a lot of data, a lot of names and numbers, that you lose the will to live. And that's what I deal with the lots of data and the numbers. So that's basically the two dashboards that cover HR, people services, data. And I'm sorry, I was unaware that members didn't have access to this.
I mean, I think that's really, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I think that this information, we are dealing with cost of sickness of £2.6 million. And I think as elected members, we should have access to this information because it is of extreme concern to all of us, as we've, said very strongly at this committee. So would that be something we should include as one of our recommendations, members?
Yeah, I think that is a very good idea. But we also if we're getting that information, we need to be able to interpret it correctly, because you know, if we don't know what we're talking about, we can go off on a massive tangent dangerously. So it's up to us, if we're going to look at it, to know how to interpret properly.
If I can just come back on that, I mean, data is just that, it's data. It just asks, it just stimulates questions. It doesn't give you the answers to those questions. And what's something at face value can look very stark, actually, when you look at the context of it, and when you actually start to ask those questions, and we're not going to have the answers to all of those questions to present to members. That's conversations that we have with our managers, but it's also what DMTs should be discussing regularly at their meetings. HR are there to support. We're not there to do it for them. We look to facilitate and enable our managers to manage sickness better. But the responsibility lies with them. So we try and assist them. We can provide them with as much data. We can help them interpret the data, and then we can advise them on activity to do. But it would be impossible to deal with everything and bring every single aspect of attendance management to this committee.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Yes. Sorry, I'd be wary of having too much information, purely because I most probably wouldn't have time to delve through it all, but I might interpret things wrongly. What concerns me over the matter is you're putting down a cost of £2.6 million for sickness. Well, that's not a cost really, is it? Because the staff who are employed would be getting that salary in any case. What we don't get is the actual cost of covering for that staff, for those staff. There must be a cost. And the effects that the absence of staff, if you don't cover the staff, is having on the staff that's left. In other words, is this a domino effect? I'm concerned about the financial losses. I'm also concerned about how this would affect staff in a domino effect, where, for example, 5 people working, one goes off sick for a long time, the other 4 got to pick up the tab. It could affect them, and then, of course, we roll into this situation. But in terms of the actual cost of covering for sickness, which is a real cost, what is it?
Councillor Lewison, we don't have that figure. We're not able to estimate it. Our systems don't capture the replacement costs of, you know, so for example, if you've got a waste operative, they're not in today, but we've got to get that bin collector out, so we have to replace that individual. There is a replacement cost. We don't have that detail, so that figure that's included here is a nominal figure. I was talking to colleagues across, some colleagues in Gwent, and they also provide a similar figure for sickness, because they aren't in a position to cost replacement costs. And also the cost on the individuals and the extra demands and anxiety that it might create for staff that are having to pick up. It's obviously we deal with that from a support perspective, but any costs in terms of them going off, then that's, you know, you can't do that as a cause and effect type exercise. But we haven't got the full cost of sickness. This is an estimate, and it's a nominal figure.
Okay, I understand the inability to really hone down and get all that information. An example, for example, would be maternity leave. You obviously know what maternity leave is going to cost you. You know how long the lady in particular is going to be off. So you know if you're going to cover her that there's a cost, and you can attribute that to it. Off odd days here and odd days there, I can understand, particularly with the refuse department, would be difficult to add up. But I think unless we can see, as members, the cost of sickness, not the cost of paying people when they're off, which is a cost you've done by appointing them into employment, is what it's actually costing us as an authority to cover for sickness on basis of, for example, maternity leave, or somebody with a long-term sickness where you need to cover them and you know there's a cost. I think there's a flaw there. I'm not worried about the 2.6 million. You've already employed the people of that, employed the people to pay that. So that's going to be there in any case, unless you get rid of them. Then you save the money, but you're not going to get rid of them. It's the cost of covering for that sickness, I think, is important for us as members. In terms of interpreting the pie charts, there's so much information there, it frazzles my brain, quite honestly.
Did you want to come back at all on that, or can we go to the next question?
All I can say is, Councillor Easton, is that we just don't have the systems to capture that, and we would be creating an industry. And we've got 6 HR officers, and they're not finance officers either, and we don't capture it in our finance system, so it's impossible to provide that information, I'm afraid. Okay. But I do appreciate your point.
Okay, so don't quote the 2.6 million. It's irrelevant to me.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you. I just wondered, do you have a look at the other 21 authorities to see if we're out of kilter anywhere, or we're better, or if they are one authority is particularly good at a particular thing, do we scratch their brains, so to speak?
Yes, we do, Councillor Harris, we do look at our position across Wales in terms of sickness. At the moment, I was recently at a mental health and wellbeing task and finish group, which was an all Wales task and finish group, because we are not unusual. Stress and mental illness is the key issue facing all authorities across Wales. Our average figure, I think, is around 26 to 27%. That is across Wales. And what we are doing is endeavouring to look at what each authority is doing in trying to tackle the issues. There isn't a silver bullet, and it's an increasing problem across Wales, and there isn't an easy answer. All we're doing is sharing different ideas, and if something is identified as working in a particular authority, then we'll give it a go. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Are there any more questions? Councillor Dimmock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry that I've been going in and out. I do apologise. It was required. Sorry if I've missed this. How long has that dashboard been available?
The dashboard, I developed the dashboard in...
Oh, it's not rolled out.
Oh, I've got to think now. 26... Where are we now? 2016. So the dashboard's been there since April 2017. So it's had a full year, and now we're into the second quarter of this year.
And do you think it's assisted with people looking at it? Is it decreased sickness, improved it? Has it had any effect at all? I just see what sort of benefits it may be having.
Yeah, I would hope it's being looked at, and it's being used by the HR team. Otherwise, it's a lot of work that I've done that is going nowhere, which is I was going to say something else, but I won't. But I'll leave it to Sally to...
Yeah, we've referred to our HR business partner in meetings, and this is where this is reviewed alongside other subject matters, people management issues as well. So we have a block on attendance which covers this. And our job at that business partner meeting is to bring managers' attention to the dashboard and to do some analysis, to think about maybe some of their long-term cases and what the interventions are, alongside the other people management issues like recruitment, etc., any cases that they may have, discipline or grievance, to think about workforce planning. So, this dashboard is invaluable to, as both Tracy and David have referred to, invaluable to assist with that. It's a tool for them to be able to refer to with their DMTs, with their management teams, so that they analyse that information. We provide it to enable them to consider the issues that are relevant in their service areas.
Could I just add to that as well? Sorry, in terms of, we're not... The authority's not great at workforce planning, and that's something that we are picking up with DMTs to say, right, okay, look, we've got this whole wealth of data, and as with all things, in some areas of the business, we're already doing workforce planning in social services where there are particular issues. So if we've had particular recruitment issues, so for example in children's services, in social care or in home care where we're having difficulty attracting, then workforce planning, because we're having difficulties, it's at the forefront. So managers are dealing with it. Where there aren't particular issues of recruiting, workforce planning, they don't necessarily see the benefits of workforce planning for 5-10 years ahead, and horizon scanning about looking at skills that they will need in the future, so whether it's digital skills or whatever. So what we're endeavouring to do, and it's part of one of the actions in our people strategy, is to work much closer now with all managers across the organisation to instill the benefits and virtues of actually workforce planning and using the data better to support that.
All I want to say is I think it's fantastic what you've built there, and I think a lot of private companies would probably be interested as well, because I think you've got an excellent tool there and we can benefit from it really when we really put it to work.
Councillor Webb.
Yes, it gives me a lot of confidence too. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and didn't really know this existed, and thank you ever so much for all this. Just wondering, when members of staff have a problem with sickness, or I just feel that we're all it's internal. Is there any mileage in going outside to an outside agency? Do the other councils go to an outside agency in order for members? You know, if you have a problem with your manager or something, you wouldn't want to actually to discuss it internally. I'm just wondering what the other councils do actually, whether they employ an outside agency for members of staff and etc.
Sorry, Councillor Webb, are you talking about counselling? Because our counselling service is external. Yes, we already offer that. Yeah, so we offer, you know, whether staff are absent from work for sickness or they maybe experience some difficulties in the workplace, then we would offer counselling. And that is external.
Can I just say, though, that has to be referred by the manager, is that correct?
That generally is the route, but it doesn't have to come via the manager. I was interviewing somebody recently and felt that they had some particular problems, and so I referred them to counselling. Alternatively, an individual can go direct to HR and say, you know, have a conversation, and HR would then you know, suggest counselling and then work with the manager to
yeah. I think the flaw here, I mean, when we look at, and I'm sure this is what you're trying to say, Councillor Webb, is that we need to have something that is completely independent and doesn't involve any staff or managers within the organisation. And large companies, I mean, I worked lastly for Liverpool Victoria Insurance Company, which is the second largest mutual insurance company in the country. And we had a fantastic system where we could self-refer to an external company without any involvement of any staff, which, you know, looking at the figures that we've got here for mental health issues and stress, obviously what we're doing is not working. It's not adequate. And I think one of the problems is that, as Councillor Webb referred to, you don't want to go to your manager, who's the cause of the problem, to get referred to an outside agency. So I think really what members are saying is that we'd like to see the council looking at providing a better service. Is that correct, Councillor Webb?
Right. And while we're talking about this, could members actually partake of this service also?
The only difficulty that we have is budget, because any counselling service that we offer, whether it's self-referred or via a manager or via HR, whatever route, there is a cost associated with it. We do offer alternative areas for support. We've introduced a go-to group, which is a confidential group of colleagues across the organisation where you can go and have a confidential conversation with. We also offer one-to-one coaching with a fully qualified coach, so that again, individuals, if they've got some problems and they would like to have a confidential conversation with it, they can go to our training manager John, and they would set up confidential coaching sessions one-to-one. So I do fully appreciate what you're saying, but we do have a limited budget, and so our counselling service has to remain within budget. So if we opened up self-referral, we'd have no control around that, I'm afraid.
Did you want to come back, Councillor
I'd
Webb?
just be interested in your aspect of this, Chairman.
Well, I feel very strongly that the cost to this council in not providing, obviously we're not providing an adequate service at the moment. We've got a massive costs that are connected with people being, very high levels of sickness, very high levels of non-attendance. And, I feel, and obviously it's down to the members, that we've got to look at alternative models because what's happening currently is not working, and clearly a lot of staff are not getting the help they need. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, going back to my question about the other 21 authorities, is there any authority that does allow, if you like, unlimited out-resourcing? No, so there's no comparison. They're better at this because they do outsourcing. Yeah,
Councillor Harris, they're not better at it. That's the fact. Yeah. The fact is that stress levels across Wales are comparative to Monmouthshire. Yeah. The levels are 26 to 27% across Wales. Yeah. The group that I'm attending is looking at it. If there was a silver bullet, I can tell you we'd grab it because, we acknowledge we've got a problem. We are identifying different techniques, interventions to try and help get people back into the workplace and actually prevent them going off in the first place, because if we can prevent people going off, then, that's better for them and it's better for the organisation. So we're certainly not resting on our laurels. It's our key priority. It's a key priority across Wales, but there isn't an easy answer. If there was, we would have done it.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to know that we're on a par. Do you spread the net further, for example, looking at English authorities and see? I should imagine it's a problem throughout the nation. I just wonder if you've got any ideas on that, on the mental health bit in particular.
It's a key issue. It's a growing issue across the country, and it's a real difficult one to deal with, because in terms of mental health, psychological absence, stress, very often it's stress not as a consequence of work, it's a consequence of home life, and that impacts on the workplace. And so it's very difficult then for us, we can provide support in the workplace, but if the individual's not in the workplace, it's very difficult to do that. Obviously, the mental illness in terms of things like bipolar disease, depression are becoming more prevalent, and individuals are more open about it these days. And whereas in the past it tended to be hidden, I don't think it is hidden anymore. I think it is coming to the fore when people are experiencing it. So it is a big problem, and and it's something that we will just continue to look for different ways, different interventions, different techniques. But if we can prevent it in the first place, or recognise the signs early on, and that's what we're saying to managers. We ran some sessions last year. I think it was 4 sessions across the authority in different locations. So we held some up in operations, in waste, with highways teams, etc., who've got high levels, high levels of stress, exactly the same as the rest of the organisation. Where we talked, it was an open discussion. What are the things that we can do as an organisation to try and support you, to help you? What are your concerns in terms of the workplace and well-being? What can we change to improve our sickness figures and make sure that people are healthy and in work?
Thank you. Following on from that, can I just ask you, because in the private sector, you would be able to access counselling services that would deal with things like debt, financial problems, going through a divorce. Are you saying that we don't have any mechanism for giving people counselling advice on issues outside the council?
Our external counselling says you would be able to do that. I mean, specific debt counselling, they would probably refer, but we would consider that in terms of a supportive measure and advise that would be something that we would consider. If a member of staff had a one-to-one with their manager and that was something that was causing concern, that an intervention of that nature would be, absolutely sought to assist.
Thank you. I think, we have to be mindful that we're really cutting all the flesh away from our budgets now, and we're getting right down to the bone, and we're putting tremendous pressure on some of our staff. And whilst they may cope on a day-to-day basis, if you then have a crisis outside of the workplace, that can be the thing that tips the balance. And I think that is what's coming across from members is our concern. Would I be right in saying that? And we are the worst funded authority in Wales, and we are very concerned about the mental health of our staff. And although we've got these various initiatives going on, the problems are not going away.
I absolutely accept those points. I think just to, perhaps if we're coming to a conclusion, just as a positive, we have seen an improvement year on year over the last 3 years. So we've gone from 11.34 to 11.19, and last year it was 10.8. We introduced a new policy, an attendance management policy last year that's been well accepted, positive feedback, and we're reflecting that has had an impact in terms of bringing down that stat. So it is, as Tracy said, it's our key priority across people's services to and it remains so. It has been for the last 3 to 4 years. It remains our priority. When our HR people meet with managers and head teachers, that is a priority in terms of helping them to address and helping them to deal with any sickness cases. So if there is a positive, I think it's just worth sharing that we were in the lowest quartile about 3 years ago, and now we're at midpoint in comparison to other local authorities across Wales.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
I'm just still a bit unhappy about this using an outside agency, and I'm just wondering the cost of this. I would just be really interested to know, and perhaps there would be impact in other ways, that would benefit us. I don't know, but I don't know how other members feel.
I mean, I think that's a valuable point, and I remember very clearly when we debated this at the last meeting, and this was something that came up there as well. And I think there's a feeling amongst members that whilst we are doing certain things, that perhaps what we're doing at the moment, we could be doing more. Is that? And I wonder whether the other members that are here, I know we're a bit thin on the ground today, do you feel that we should be recommending to the council that they look at what we're concerned about is the fact that, a manager or somebody from HR has to refer somebody, and we would rather see a system of self-referral. Obviously, cost has to come into it, but then we have to look at the cost to our organisation of what's happening at the moment. So would that be helpful?
That's exactly what I was trying to say, actually, and I would second your...
Okay, fine. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, maybe that's something we should, in our recommendations, obviously strongly recommend to the Cabinet, because there's obviously going to be a cost implication that they need to factor in for the budget. But I'm interested to hear that the sickness absence levels are going down, and we must congratulate you on that, because they'll be going down against a workforce that's also decreasing. So it's a double gain, if you know what I mean. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that.
Thank you. So are there any other questions from members at all? Otherwise, I'll sum up. I think it's been very helpful having this update today. I think the information provided is far more comprehensive than it was last time, and I think that is something we welcome. It's also been very helpful having the interpretation of the data, and to have Dave here to tell us about this information that's available to managers, because I wasn't aware of that before. And I think what members are saying today is that yes, we do need an annual update. And I think things in pictures are so much better than a written report. And I think those thermometers and seeing things pictorially, you know, it's something we have such a workload. A lot of us work as well, and we have to absorb a lot of information. And if we can get this detail summarised so that we can see where the issues are quickly, it's so much more helpful than reams and reams of figures, which, you know, we can't take in. So I think looking at the recommendations that are clearly listed on page 15, that members note the information provided, that members receive an annual attendance report to include information on sickness turnover and occupational health matters. I think we're adding to that, you know, we would like to have a summary if we don't have access to this, because Councillor Easton said he's concerned about his interpretation of it, but we would like to have perhaps a brief summary for councillors that is available on the hub, so that we can, you know, see a précis of it, if you like, of what the challenges, the top of mind challenges are, because I'm sure the HR department are fully aware on a month by month basis where the issues are, and I think we need to have an understanding of that so that we can plan accordingly. And I think also, as Councillor Webb has said, we recommend to Cabinet that we look at other models. I understand that there's one in Torvine where members of staff can self-refer and not have to have the involvement, and we'd like to get some pricings and what the cost will be. So we'd like Cabinet to you know, push that forward. Is there anything else? Is everybody happy with those recommendations? Councillor Easton.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify my concern about access to the information. At the moment, there's a system in place whereby it goes through managers, and it's dealt with on an individual basis, on a case-by-case basis. As a member, I think it'd be a bit dangerous for me to have information which could be interpreted and possibly used in a wrong way. That's really what I mean by I can interpret it. I can interpret pie charts and not what, but too much information can be dangerous.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Tracy.
Just clarity then, Chair. In terms of the information you want, summary information on an annual basis on attendance.
Yeah.
So summary information on attendance in terms of sickness and the issues across the authority, but at high level, and do it on an annual basis as per the recommendation.
Do any members think we need it more regularly than annually? What's the feeling amongst?
I wouldn't mind 6 monthly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think annually is adequate enough. Councillor Harris, did you? So there's a feeling that we'd like this information twice a year. Well, thank you very much, members, for that debate, and thank you for coming along today. And yes,
I would expect the HR department to let you know if there was anything that was deeply concerning within that 6 months. And I just assume that would happen in any case. So flagging up anything that really concerns you to the chair would be, I'm sure, what you would do in any case.
Thank you, Councillor Harris, for that point. So thank you very much, officers, for I think that was a very interesting debate this morning, and you know, we look forward to doing all we can to support our staff who do such a fantastic job under very difficult circumstances in the current economic climate. But we're very mindful that the climate is not getting any easier, and we've got to be able to deal with the challenges ahead. And without our staff, we're not going to be able to achieve anything. So thank you very much. So we now move on to our next agenda item, which is the Budget Monitoring Outturn Report for the Regeneration and Corporate Directorate. And I would like to ask Mark and Dave who I think, is it Dave, you're presenting And I can see Mark at the back, so welcome, Mark.
Chair, if it's okay with you, I'll let Dave present the report, and if there's any points of clarification or you wish me to interfere constructively, then I will do.
Thank you very much indeed. So go ahead, Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This is the Period 1 Finance Report for Revenue and Capital. Unfortunately, there's not many pictures or graphs in this one. It's a long report, so I'll provide you with a brief summary. I did prepare some notes, but with the IT issues that we've got this morning, I can't access them, so my apologies if I'm scanning back and forth, and I'm jumping back and forth different paragraphs. So yeah, this is a Period 1 report. It is based on actuals and committed spend up to month 2, which is May. So the forecasts have been extrapolated out from data up to that point. So it's very early on in the year to provide accurate forecasts through to year end. So it could be that as we go through the financial year, you will see some changes to some of these figures. So this report went to Cabinet on the 25th of July, I think. So it now allows you as a select committee to provide further scrutiny. So if I refer you to section 2, which is the recommendations that were proposed to Cabinet, probably the first 4 recommendations there are relevant to this select committee. I won't read them verbatim, but recommendation 1 is that there's consider a net revenue forecast overspend of 471,000. The members consider the capital outturn position. Members consider the use of reserves, and obviously members note the low level of earmarked reserves. Okay, so section 3. I'll go back. This report is split generally into 3 areas: revenue outturn, capital outturn, and then is a section on reserves at the end. So the first section is the revenue position, which can be found in section 3. There's a table there that gives you a breakdown of how that outturn position has been achieved. Obviously, we've got a net overspend of 471,000. That's made up of 521,000 overspend on net cost of services, offset by £50,000 underspend on treasury and financing. So that table breaks down how each department has done. You'll see there's an interesting column on the far right of the report that gives you the actual outturn position for that directorate for last financial year. So you can see the month 2 position, and then you can compare that to the how the directorate performed last year. So you can see that although we're saying a £471,000 overspend for month 2, actually last financial year the authority underspent by 652,000. So you can see that the position can change as the year goes on. Okay. So if I take you to section 3.2.1, which covers the areas that falls under this select committee. So the Stronger Community Select portfolio is forecasting a £142,000 underspend, and that's split down as follows. So we have a brief breakdown, but I'll just go through them for you quickly. So Chief Executives is overspending by 218,000. We have a small underspend in legal, but quite a large overspend in operations. That can be split down. There's a surplus in highways and overspend in catering. Passenger transport unit's got a £100,000 overspend, and our waste and street scene has a £118,000 overspend. Resources Directorate, £199,000 overspend. Again, Finance Division, we've got an underspend of 47,000. We've got a £54,000 overspend in IT. Our People Services section are forecasting a £34,000 overspend, and our Landlord Division is also forecasting a £158,000 deficit. Corporate, we have a £509,000 underspend. That's predominantly down to an unutilised redundancy budget that hasn't been called on this year yet. And also a refund on a rate refund in respect of our council's buildings. Our appropriation sections break even, and then financing is £50,000 under, which is to do with council tax benefit payments. So below that, then you will have so that's a brief run through. There is actually more detail on the spreadsheets that accompany these reports. But obviously, if you have got further queries, I can attempt to answer them, or myself and Mark, to give you an idea what why those overs or underspends have been achieved. Below that, then we have the head of directorate's commentaries. So we've got one from Peter Davis, Resources, Roger Hoggins, Head of Operations, and I think that's a small comment from Kelly Byrne, who was originally the Deputy Chief Exec. So then moving on to section 3.4. So this is a progress table on how the savings, the 18-19 budget savings, have progressed. So from the table you can see as of the £5.061 million worth of savings that were built into our budget as an authority, 4.336 have been found, 490,000 has been delayed, and 235 have been deemed unachievable. Paragraph 3.4.5 again highlights the stronger community selects portfolio and tells you of those savings on that table, which ones haven't been found. So again, there's detail there of what savings have been found for the different sections within the directorates. I think the table or the appendix that is attached to this report gives you a traffic light indication of how the savings, of the risk of those savings being achieved or not. So again, we're talking about how things may have changed from what we've reported a month to now. We've got an issue there, I think, on the Chief Executive Office about the PTU savings having a shortfall. I've recently had a chat with our passenger transport accountant, and they are now confident that those savings have been found. So hopefully that will improve our outturn position going through to month 7. So then moving down to section 3.5, this is the capital position for the authority. Paragraph 3.5.2 probably very succinctly gives you position. Predominantly forecasting on budget for now. There is a small slippage already identified within our portfolio. I think that detail is in the paragraph below. It's two Section 106 schemes that have been delayed till next year. Obviously, the author has stated in paragraph 3.5.2 that the main areas for the authority's capital programme is the 21st century schools. There's obviously a sentence here regarding the potential issues with asbestos costs at the school. So that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on going through to month 7. Obviously, it doesn't fall within this portfolio, but just thought I'd bring that to your attention. So then 3.6 gives you the financing mechanisms for our capital programme. That just breaks down how we're expected to fund it for the year. 3.7 gives you highlights the capital receipts that are expected to come in through the year. Again, there's a paragraph there, 3.7.3, that highlights the importance of receiving the receipts in a timely manner, because if we don't have, because our capital programme is so linked into the capital receipts, if we don't receive some at a certain point in time, it means we might have to borrow, which will cost the authority more money in interest, etc. So the last paragraph, or last section, is 3.8, which is reserves. Again, it reflects the reserve usage for the financial year. At month 2, we're assuming, or presuming, that all reserves will be fully utilised. Again, there was a recommendation at the start suggesting that our reserves are running out, and that members note that the low levels of earmarked reserves, and that you know, if we do need to consider how we top them up as they get used. Okay. There's a little paragraph there just to say useful reminder showing how last year's underspend was split and how those reserves were topped up. Okay. So that was a brief run through. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave, and thank you to the team and to Mark for an excellent report, which for lay people like me, you know, it's so easy to understand, which it isn't difficult to get all these very difficult concepts over to us as councillors. So are there any questions for the team from members? Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got 5 questions, really. The first one is, what was the asbestos problem? What school was it at? Sorry. The second one, PT unit, £118,000 overspend because of overspend on public PTU. Why do we continue to have a problem with the PTU unit? We pick this up in audit quite a lot. There seems to be always a pressure on the PTU. The other one was this concern I see regarding Blaenau Gwent Council, where they pulled out of £100,000 they ought to pay us for some work we're doing, I believe, in Landfoist. The other one was the £600,000 underspend overall last year suggests to me that we're playing into the hands of the Welsh Government if we keep creating an underspend. So I think it'd be better off we had an overspend and try to get some more money off them. And relating to the last item we spoke about, I noticed in here, I hadn't noticed it before, that they estimate a cost of £34,000 for maternity leave, for the cost of covering maternity. My final question is, it's not so much our remit, but it picks up on comments I feel. There seems to be concerns about the ongoing position with the ADM. You've got some comments in here which suggest that you might have some pecuniary concerns about the way it develops. Am I correct in reading that in there? And that's my general question.
Thank you. If I could bring Mark in at this point.
Yeah, see if I can remember those 5 questions. So the first one was about the asbestos aspect around 21st century schools. Recognising the age of the buildings involved at both Caldecott and Monmouthshire, in the days that those buildings were put up, it was fairly commonplace for asbestos to be a usable building material. Now, there's an understanding when you do your project review that you'll actually test the building materials and make an allowance for the professional disposal of such. Well, you can appreciate that actually some of this can't easily be tested until the buildings come down, so it may very well be below slabs or behind cladding, etc. But what I can reassure members is that actually the matter of asbestos is taken seriously. It is being disposed of professionally. There is a cost involved in disposing of it professionally. That was those 2 schools were a collective scheme of just over £90 million, an overspend of 350, or an anticipated overspend, because we haven't quantified what the full extent of that is yet, but we believe prudently it to be of the order of 350 is a very minor overspend in the overall project management. Your second question was about...
I think there should have been some consideration built in the fact that asbestos was going to be there, and maybe it should have been built in. And whilst you
Sorry, Councillor, asbestos removal was built into the fabric as a presumption.
yeah, but not we.
But
don't
obviously
see
the extent of that asbestos, appreciating that these buildings were put up in the 50s, there wouldn't have been charts or plans to actually show every aspect of asbestos. And it's only when you start to take these buildings down that you can actually get access under the slabs.
extra cost. You say was a small amount in terms of the £90 million cost of the schools. But that £300,000 could have been helped on the way of providing school meals for children. You know, I think that we've got to put things in perspective. It's a minor amount in the 90 million, but it's a big amount when you come to other areas where we ought to be considering where we do consider prudence.
I'm not sure what you're considering, Councillor. I mean, if the asbestos are there and needs removing, spending it on children's meals still leaves you with a problem in terms of removing asbestos?
I accept that, but I do believe that that figure should have been built in. It should have been a known figure. We knew there was asbestos in also schools. They were built when asbestos was used freely. If it had been built in at the beginning, maybe we wouldn't have incurred extra costs at the end of the day. Or have I got it wrong?
Councillor Easton, I appreciate the point you've made, but I think that the officer has said quite clearly and quite frankly, you know, we don't know what we're going to unearth until we start taking that building down. And I mean, I personally know 15 years ago, I had to remove asbestos from a small kitchen of a 2-bedroomed maisonette in London, and it cost me £7,000. So I think in the scheme of things, you know, 350,000 on such an enormous project, we have to accept that. And I think to debate that any further, we're not going to achieve anything. So if we could, but thanks for making the point. And if we could move on to the next point, please.
The PTU service, we rely quite heavily on PTU in a semi-rural authority, more so than perhaps a city-based local authority that can rely on a viable bus network. So it does proportionately cost us more. Some of the extent of PTU costs mean that actually it's a significant area to look at whether we could do things more economically or more sustainably. The proposals were presented to members as to which areas they would look at last year, and they took forward, and actually the explanation that we're a little behind with some of those savings proposals recognises that probably capacity-wise both PTU and the officers that are helping facilitate those arrangements probably mean that they're actually taken in as a phased approach rather than can all be achieved in April. I think with the benefit of hindsight, we perhaps should have been a bit more prudent in our estimation of progress.
I know that we have a problem with the PTU in as much as we can't buy new buses, and we've got to deal with a procurement process which tends to be a bit, the procurement process is quite onerous, but we've got to find ways of getting around that. And I know that we regularly talk about this in audit committee, so yes, I understand that. The next question was about this deal with Blaenau Gwent.
During the budget process, if you recall, that over the Christmas period, we became aware that actually our financial planning assumption of 1% pay award turned into a financial agreement of 2% pay award, which, if you're aware of the financing of local authority, it means that actually we have to provide or find the resources to afford that. It doesn't mean that because there is an agreement that someone's given the equivalent of 1% pay award to the council, it's not reflected in any settlement agreements, etc. So that necessitated a new round of savings proposals in affording a 1% budget, which equated to just over £1 million, to give you an idea. So one of the proposals was that we were doing particularly well with our recycling targets, actually above the levels that Welsh Government required. Conversely, other authorities find that more difficult. So it was explored whether actually we could sell the effect of our recycling credits to actually improve another authority's performance. And by the time it became apparent that actually instead Blaenau Gwent were going to invest in the service and try to do the arrangement themselves, the budget had actually been settled. So not unusually, when savings don't materialise, that will need to be managed through this year's budget monitoring process. And that's one of the reasons why we actually do your savings summary every period. so that you can actually see where progress is and where the alternate savings are being proposed from.
Are you happy with those responses, Councillor Easton?
The last
Thank
one,
you.
Reid, was I'm trying to find it on there. There's an indication to me that you've got some concerns about the direction the ADM is taking. Am I reading it rightly, or am I just wrong?
I think probably trying to recall the references. My reservation is more about the optimism bias of some of the forecast figures in the monitoring report. Which is why I actually also provided the similar figures for last year's financial outturn. So the two areas where I've volunteered members may wish to keep a focus on would be children's services, because that incurred a £1.6 million overspend last year. This year I think it's only of just under 300,000 at the moment. It's a particularly volatile area to forecast, as decisions about one claim can easily have a £100,000 consequence in a year. So that would be one area where I suspect has potential to get worse before it gets better in the financial year. The other one, recognising that members have been asked to consider the sustainability of tourism, leisure and culture services. It's a surprise to me that the adverse variance at the end of this year is reported at only 58,000. I understand that members will be considering that in more detail as the process gets refined, and you may wish to understand and reconcile those two positions as colleagues have presented this as a situation that the only way that service can be sustainably provided into the future is by outsourcing.
Thank you very much indeed for that those answers. Are there any more questions from members? No? Well, I would like to thank the team for bringing this report to us. I mean, I think that, really looking at what you've achieved, and we're so fortunate that we've got staff here when we look at what's happening. Sorry.
I've just recalled the other question that Councillor Easton had about the outturn last year and 600,000, and whether actually we're making it easy for Welsh Government. I just make a plea to all of you to explain that actually the financial monitoring is a management tool to improve the situation. You'll appreciate that actually through the year things change. We're relying on working with 200 plus budget holders that all have a responsibility to deliver their services, so there are quite a lot of volatile moving parts. But actually, whilst the £600,000 surplus sounds significant, in the overall budget it's probably less than 0.4%. Whilst I'm pleased to be the right side of the line, I'd have been equally as pleased to have a £600,000 deficit that only introduced a 0.4 variance against our overall budget. But it's pleasing to be able to actually put money back into earmarked reserves.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Councillor Easton, did you want to come back on any of those? No. So just to sum up, I mean, I think that obviously we have to congratulate staff on the absolutely incredible job they do to making these savings. I think looking forward, I think it's obviously very challenging times ahead. And when I look at last winter and operations that comes under us, as councillors, we're under increasing pressure to provide, our residents expect a very high standard of roads, and, the snow and the ice that we had, I think cost us about £500,000, didn't it, Mark, last winter. So we only need to have another winter like that and a few other factors, and the opportunities for flexibility within our budget are getting fewer and fewer. So I think it's very helpful to have this update at this point, but I think that the council does need to continue to lobby Welsh Government for a fairer settlement. And I think, as you rightly point out, we've got very challenging times ahead as far as, continuing to provide these core services and really looking at other ways of delivering as far as tourism and leisure are concerned. So thank you very much indeed to Mark and Dave for an excellent report and update for us. Thank you.
You didn't mention the melting roads in the summer. Mention the melting roads in the summer.
We can cope with the melting rolls when it's sunny. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. And we now we now look at I think, should we take the minutes of the last two meetings next, because we've agreed to look at these. So if we can confirm the minutes of the meeting held, which seems a long time ago now, on the 12th of July. Would any members like to raise any issues about those minutes? Or are you happy that they are a true... Councillor Webb? Move. All in favour? Yes, thank you very much. And then closer was the special meeting we held on the 30th of July, which was to do with street furniture and day boards. Any comments? No? And we're Councillor Eason to move those minutes. So if we can now look at the Strong Communities Forward Work programme.
Thank you, Chair. As you can see, it's not densely populated at the moment. There is a reason behind that, in so much as we are looking for members of the select committees to give us ideas, items they feel they can add value to. We appreciate that there's updates that need to come to us on a regular basis along people services this morning, but we're really looking for something that members can drive through. A particular example of this is the Chair's suggestion for modern slavery. I've spoken to the public protection officers this morning, and they're awaiting training with the local police, which will be open to a few members, and obviously there'll be a public members forum to update all members on what the council are actually doing in respect of modern slavery at the moment. Next month's meeting, we have a particularly interesting item. The Chair and myself and David Jones's local members met with Coed Cwnwr Environmental Group last month to look at the council's new litter policy, because that's something that they had particular concerns about. And although as a group, as volunteers, they do outstanding work, they don't necessarily feel that they're getting the support from the council that they can. So Coed Cwnwr has proposed a pilot scheme for 3 months with the consultation, and we're going to work with the Coed Cwnwr Environmental Group to see what strategies work, what they can put in place, suggestions, advertising, changing people's mindset, which you can appreciate is probably one of the most tentative things to do. But yes, it's something I think as a select committee we're going to add a lot of value to, and I think is something that will really serve a purpose long term. The Public Protection Report is an update of all the services, and as you know, it covers a multiple of fields. They're happy to take any steer on anything that you'd particularly like highlighted, but if there's no suggestions, they'll just bring a general report. And the last item is simply an update from Kath Fallon's team in regard to Usk in Bloom and the contribution that we made to that this year.
Thank you very much indeed, Paula. Are there any suggestions for our forward work programme? I mean, I'd like to kick off with one. I don't know whether you feel, members, it's prudent that we have a look at the future of our high streets and, you know, how we're going to have a strategy on what we're going to see in our high streets in the future, and look at car parking charges, look at accommodation, and the mix of shops and residential and all of those. Is that something for planning, or do you think that's something that we could bring to this committee? Councillor Webb.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with you, thank you. And I think probably prior to this, we should actually look at the high streets, and people that aren't familiar with Chepstow should pop over to Chepstow and make sure that, I mean, Chepstow at the moment, can I say, Madam Chairman, is absolutely fantastic. The flowers and everything, it really welcomes people there. And I think we should have make sure that everybody knows what they're talking about before we actually talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dimmock.
Just with regards to the littering, are we looking at including dog fouling, just because of the recent coverage on the BBC this week with regards to what's going on with Flintshire Council? Excuse me, stuttery mess today. obviously it's an ongoing problem in my ward. I'm sure every member here. So I think maybe looking into this afresh, going into the new year as well.
Yeah, that's covered not by the recycling and waste team, as littering would be. It's with public performance and environmental health. But it doesn't mean they can't join up, and it doesn't mean that they can't work together. So that's certainly something I'll have a word with Carl as head of waste and David as head of public protection, and we'll see what they're doing at the moment, okay?
Any other suggestions at all? Councillor Eason.
Yes, I support your thoughts on the street scene and looking at the high streets. Cabinet decided last week to set up a scheme in conjunction with the Welsh Government in Caldicot. I think it might be useful for members to be aware and have a briefing on that scheme, because it's trying to get over the fact that high streets are dying. We read this morning that John Lewis is in trouble as well now. And it says to me that no matter what you've got in the town centre, you're not going to get any bigger businesses than the small businesses there, and how to encourage them. So that's what's being done, hopefully, in Caldicot. It's going to be a difficult task, but I think the committee ought to have a feeling of that and a feedback to see how it may affect the Abergavennies and the Monmouths in general.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Councillor Eason. And I did see the photographs in the local press of what Caldicot is going to look like in the future, and I think this is, critical to all of our communities, and we've got to look forward, and we've got to be proactive in thinking about, what we want to see there in the future and how we're going to make sure that our communities continue to thrive and that we have attractive town centres. So we will put that on our. But as you rightly say, Councillor Webb, we need to know what we're talking about. Okay. Yes.
On that one, if it's going on the agenda, we ought to have somebody senior from planning here as well, because it's absolutely vital that we do whatever we do within whatever we're allowed to do.
Yes. I think actually, really, it goes across economy and development as well. You could almost have, you could have a joint committee on this, because we could invite them, because I think it is for everybody. And as Councillor Eason says, I mean, John Lewis, I think it was a 99% downturn in profits this morning. And goodness me, if that isn't a very clear warning to all of us. So I would like to just let you know, as we move on to the Cabinet and Council Forward Work Programme, that I did go and present the papers from the last Select to Cabinet last week. And I was welcomed by the leader, and I think this is something that moving forward all Select chairs should go and present the recommendations. And I would like to also go to the next one, because I do think we've got to make sure that the recommendations that come from these important meetings that we hold are clearly delivered to our Cabinet. Councillor Webb.
Can I just say thank you for doing that? It's really important. I mean, so often on the Cabinet agendas and minutes, we don't see anything from select committees, and we need to let them know that we're out there, and thank you for doing that.
Webb.
Yeah, I totally endorse that. I don't remember the last time a select committee recommendation went to Cabinet and actually came back to full council, etc. No, I think that is very good, and it should be recommended, as been mentioned, to all the other chairs as well, because if the Cabinet know really directly what we're saying here, they're more likely to take notice, or if not, from your example, they don't take notice at their peril.
Exactly. Pardon? Well, I think that you know, we are the voice of the people, and obviously we had that clear example of what happens when we're not listened to. But I think moving forward, we're very lucky on this committee. We've had some excellent engagement, and we had a very good meeting with the Clanverhangel Cwnwr litter group, and they've got an enormous contribution. They've got absolute experts in that team, in that environmental team, and they've got a very important contribution, and we're going to be running a pilot. And, you know, we really need to involve our communities wherever we can. And I was very pleased that we had the engagement we had today. Councillor Eason.
I endorse that. 2 nights ago in Caldicot Town Council, we had Citizens Awards, and 2 of the citizens had awards for litter picking in small areas, looking after the environment, and I think it's important.
Thank you. So the Cabinet and Council Forward Work Programme is there for everybody to see. Are there any comments at all? Otherwise, thank you all very much. Can I thank our 2 officers for all their hard work this morning as well? And I now close the meeting. The next meeting is the 15th of November at 10 o'clock. We do have a meeting which is going to be at the beginning of October, which is to do with the speed awareness group, and that is Roger will email everybody with the date and time, and we're also going to invite representatives from all the community councils. That's right. Yes. Thank you.